Wouldn't it be great if you had another voice on YouTube who was giving you real insights into what it takes to succeed in the cybersecurity as a discipline? Or was interviewing world-class practitioners to tease out tools and tactics? Well, that's what today our guest, Ricky Tan, the founder and host of Cyberspatial, does every week. He's got a YouTube channel that's different than the rest because instead of fictionalizing and dramatizing the cybersecurity work on a day-to-day basis, he tells you like it is. He tells you what the real world is going to be like and what are the skills and steps that an individual can do to level up their game so they can be their very best inside this community we have here. So in this conversation, we talk about a ton of things, and I think you're really going to love it. Ricky is just such an incredible human, and he has such incredible insights into how to communicate and how to build the narrative and stories of cybersecurity accurately so they are more inclusive, so they are painting a picture so people are set up for success as they're going through it. So please enjoy the conversation with Ricky. I think you'll find it fascinating. He's an incredible individual with a ton of wealth of knowledge. He absolutely gives me a run for my money. And after this conversation, I had a bunch of reading I had to go do afterwards. So I think you'll love it. So please sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation with Ricky Tan, the host of Cyberspatial. And if at any point during this conversation, you're like, wow, that really touched me, I really like that, please hit the subscribe button. Give us a like, drop something in the comments below, and let me know if you want to join us at our Discord channel where we can continue the conversation. Until next time, please enjoy the show. Transformational technology and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Conor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. Welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Conor, and today, our guest is Ricky Tan. Ricky is a West Point graduate. He's a retired U.S. Army soldier who served in cyber operations. He is also now the host of Cyberspatial, a media company that is aiming at making cybersecurity accessible to everyone by interviewing world-class practitioners and experts. Ricky, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Conor.
Yeah, I've been so excited for this conversation since we got connected by Stefan a few weeks back, like almost a couple months back now. And so he was kind enough to jump and share his wisdom on the podcast. Can I call him wisdom? I don't know, Stefan's insights, wisdom, his grandiose perspective on life a few weeks ago. And when he mentioned you and the connection you guys had there and then your journey through Cyberspatial, I was like, please, you got to find a way to get Ricky on the show here. So Ricky, you've built something really cool with Cyberspatial by bringing like this real world experts and taking these real world practitioners and making it accessible for people on YouTube and other platforms. Can we just start there? Like walk us through Cyberspatial and the impact you're having there, and then how you got to Cyberspatial to build out this media company.
Yeah. So, one of the challenges that I really struggle with in my own journey, just like, ever since I was a kid, is just the lack of analysis and exposition on these topics out there. There's a lot of books and guides and how-tos, but most of the deeper levels of understanding come from just raw experience, spending time with more senior people and just the sheer hours and hours tinkering around and absorbing culture and media. I remember the late nights playing with the original backtrack, countless hours, listening to like Soma FM. Groove Salad is the channel, is my favorite. Reading mailing lists and lurking forums, compiling Wi-Fi driver patches to be able to get packet injection for aircraft, aircrack.
Yes.
Since we were all using WEP at the time, and watching Hack 5, and we all had a crush on Shannon Morse. Listening to
those who won't admit it,
talks.
they did. Yes.
So I think the junior years is incredibly formative for people getting into this space. What you see and listen to really have a tremendous impact on shaping your mental paradigm as you're learning. And so, the culture and media aspect of cybersecurity education in these more traditional sources like academia or industry, it's not going to get you 100% of the way there. right? The context is everything, because you can just learn about, say, networking, and just read RFCs and all of that, but not understanding that, oh, there's these memes out there too, or these pop culture references, or these things in the community that have to do with networking. It adds color and flavor to it.
Yeah.
And so, at the time I was career transitioning, and I had the opportunity to work in the traditional cybersecurity space, but instead decided to do some risk taking and try to do something more independent on my own. I took a look at what was out on YouTube, and it was really quite meager. A lot of
Yeah.
heavily accented screencast voiceovers, or the dark, hacker themed content
Yes.
that's not quite reflective of this domain, right? There's all those people, they're out there, but for the most part, there's normal people too. And we're now in a time where there's just so much more consumption of audio and video content, if the same amount, if not much more, than print media. And YouTube is what, the second largest search engine behind Google. And
Yeah.
video is almost just like a next step natural evolution of engagement. At first you were reading, if you looked at those 1900s, how they did their people did their marketing advertising, it was like some newspaper, some just like big bold like text, right?
Yes.
And it was just text. And then somebody came out and showed a picture, and people were, wow, like there's a giant picture now. And then we progressed here, and everything's in video. So it's kind of like blogs 10 years ago were blogs, and now I guess vlogs, video logs,
Mhm.
is the new thing. So it's a high bandwidth communication channel that's just more convenient for audiences, I think, at least consumer trends nowadays. So doing this as the cyber media project is currently the primary push.
That's awesome, dude. And I love the fact that you've got such a keen focus on, say, more accurately portraying cybersecurity culture. And that, which we'll go back to something you said at the very beginning here, which is like the culture, the content we consume, whether it be print, whether it be books, whether it be whatever it is, really shapes our worldview and the tools that we have at our disposal as we get into the security community. Like, embarrassingly, the reason I'm in cybersecurity is because I always had like this knack of like, okay, yes, I tripped over Linux at the right time in my life. And I was like, oh my God, what is this thing? But then like Die Hard 4 came out. And I remember it so distinctly. Like, there's that conversation between Bruce Willis and like whoever, whatever the name of the actor is, and the kid, he's like hacking on his computer. And he was told to explain what he does. And he has one phrase, and it like just burned in my subconscious. He said, I do math-based security. And I was however old when I watched that movie. And I'm like, yes, that's me. That's what I'm gonna do the rest of my life. I'm doing math-based security. And I got down this road of cryptography and realized really quickly that I am not a cryptologist. Like, that is way too hard for me. But like, you're right, like the movies, the TV, what we consume shapes our viewpoint so much. And then I could say the same thing for the 2600 magazines, the quarterly
Oh
hacker
yeah.
publications, like talk to us, like how many people in cybersecurity today like back, like started with phreaking, started with, looking at those old school techniques of like circumventing these technologies because they cracked open a quarterly publication. They found some random bookstore and like, that's what got them on their security journey. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think your point on culture is so it needs to be highlighted a little bit more that the culture and the content we put out influences the culture that we live in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I was the rebellious kid at one point, and like, I was like 8. I was like, I found a copy of the Anarchist Cookbook somewhere on the internet, and I was like, oh man, there's this thing called like phreaking, and there's these like one of these red boxes and black boxes, blue boxes and beige
Uh-huh.
boxes, and wait, you can, although you can make phone calls for free, or you could do all these things. And I realized there was a world out there that was it was like puzzles, and it was puzzle solving. If you were able to understand the system so well that you could essentially cast magical spells over it, but
Yes.
not real magic, but like, well, real, what is real magic, really?
It's just science we haven't understood, right? Isn't that the phrase? Yeah.
Yeah, so 2600 and people like Peter Zatko Mudge,
Hmm.
right? When they were talking about, it was like hackers in front of the Congress, that these pivotal moments in time, they really do leave lasting impression on you. And I think there's a lot of intersection with kind of games and stuff, because games are to an extent puzzles, and so figuring out how to circumvent things inside of a human defined system is kind of what hacking is at its core. I really have a lot of respect for tax attorneys, by the way,
Hmm.
because when you look at laws in the world, they're almost like uninterpreted Python scripts. You're right. They're Python scripts that you just kind of code it up and you hit run, and they fail at runtime, or exceptions, or things you don't
Uh-huh.
actually know. And so what do? You get some master programmers that come and inspect the code before you run it, and they will say, okay, this, I'm pretty sure this is going to run the way it's intended
Yes.
to run. But as we all know, there's always different loopholes and edge cases and these things. People like tax attorneys are the ones who study, let's just say, tax law, and they're able to, craft some kind of a exploit to take advantage of the system. So it's the laws and stuff. They're almost like code that's running in much slower time, not computer or CPU time, but in human time.
Yeah, dude, that's the world's best analogy. I've never heard it put like that, and I love it. And I'm gonna totally run with that. Um, I love the idea of uninterpreted Python code that we don't know until it's running. We'll see what happens then. Um, but yeah, so that idea, like going in front of so the content on our platforms shapes our world viewpoint on what we can and can't do with security. I mean, you alluded to this, right? In front of Congress, where they told everyone that if Kevin Mitnick was to whistle into a phone, he would set off a nuclear holocaust. And it's one of the reasons his jail sentence was so high, because the judges believed him. Like, so it was before it got Supreme Court, but then judges. And it's like, because they had all seen the movie War Games, back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad. So let's go back into what you're doing with Cyberspatial. So this content you're creating, really is being more accurate, more reflective of our actual community. And what when people jump on the YouTube channel or the platforms, what is the hope that a practitioner or a leader would kind of walk away with?
Yeah, so part of it, there's the people who are just getting into it, and they see something that's done well. It's done well enough that they're willing to maybe even go and back catalog all of the old stuff too, to kind of extract the more value out of what's there. For people who are more senior and leaders, it's something that they see. It saves them time and effort to have to explain concepts, because if you have to explain if you're in a team and there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 more junior people who don't know how to code, and they ask you, hey, do I need to learn how to code? Right? Coding's hard. You kind of have to spend time answering that question, thinking, how do I,
Yeah.
tell them, yes, you do, in the nicest way, but it's also complicated because there's really very few yes or no answers in this space, right? And if you can point them to something that saves you time, you think is accurate, it basically doesn't steal away the limelight from you, right? Because oftentimes if it's like, oh, this guy is really good, just listen to him, it's almost as, oh, I'm not good enough to share it. But if it's like, oh, this is some decent background homework, some background study, and then come back to me and I'll give you my own opinion of what's really on the ground or what's applicable to me. Because, the stuff I put out there, there's a lot of things that people can disagree with, and that's totally fine. But just broadening people's, horizons of just saying, hey, this exists. It's, have you thought about it this way? Have you thought about it another way? And I think for people who are leaders and who are senior, that's the value it brings to them. It saves them time. It also pays some respect to the profession, really, because that's what this is really about. I think cybersecurity is about people first, right? People, their projects, and the overall profession. And so that culture and image that you're kind of pointing to people to, if you feel like it's representational of what you do, then you're more likely to want to share it and promote it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point about, having it be more reflective of our actual community. There's been appropriately a lot of conversations in the cybersecurity community about we have a lot of hyper underrepresented groups, right? Our cybersecurity community is not reflective of our larger American community or our larger other communities. And so I think part of that has to do with how one of the guests we had on the show a while back said, security practitioners tend to be self-selecting and self-isolating and secretive. And so if you kind of allow that to be the culture, we end up separating ourselves and we end up in this more and more refined, exclusive universe where it's only those who know how the magic works are permitted to be a part of the cybersecurity community. Versus the reality is it's a trained skill where you can have somebody junior who does come from a diverse background, who then has the opportunity to learn something that they didn't learn in any other platform. And then they get better and better at their skill set. And then we all benefit from that. So the point there just being that, when you're creating content that's like reflective of reality, right, and making it more accessible to everyone, I really like that. And the fact it kind of just in small ways just removes barriers that other people may have inadvertently they may have like self-selected to not pursue a cybersecurity career because nobody had shared their same background. Nobody shared any same stories that they had, but now they can because they have other background. They can connect with the other person who's on there, and as you were saying, they can agree or disagree with those opinions, and that's great. That's also part of our community is that we have opinions, and not everyone agrees with them, and we're going to unpack that. So anyway, I know I was rambling a little bit there because you just touched on something that's like really important. I really do love and I do appreciate the fact you're highlighting that. So if I may, when one of the things I've loved so far about watching your content on YouTube, watching these interviews, is that you seem to also have quite a bit breadth of individuals that you're interviewing. And it's not like I see some channels and they're like only about those who want to get good at writing Metasploit scripts in Ruby on this version, or like they're hyper focused on something. But you've really focused on this broader community, pulling from a broader community, so red team, blue team, so on and so forth. Have there been any interviews that have really stuck out to you? Any videos that you've produced that you're like, that one was like absolutely the best, and if someone was to jump over there now, that'd be the one you'd recommend they start with?
Yeah, I really enjoy doing the one on the cyber kill chain, because the cyber kill chain is one of those topics that it's been around for a while now, but I think 7+ years,
Mm-hmm.
and still it's this mystifying kind of thing that when you don't have, it's hard to have a mental model about, okay, what is the cyber kill chain? People think, oh, is it a chain, right? Like an actual chain, that because when you think of the word gravity in your head, right,
Mm-hmm.
it's a completely different mental image than when Stephen Hawking thinks of the word gravity. And that mental image that you have really informs how you learn things and how you remember things. So some of the visuals and some of the kind of composition, storytelling composition we were able to do on that video, I think does respect to really, the cyber kill chain as a extraordinary evolution and development in this field.
Yeah, because I think for the first time, it all gave us a common language. And if we don't have an orienting framework and an orienting language, then we're all talking over each other and not trying to actually solve from the adversary. It's like, wait, are we dealing with an exploit or are we dealing with an exfiltration? Right? They're very different parts of that cyber kill chain. So I think it was.
They're exploitrating everything.
There you go. Exploit trade all of the things. That's great, man. So What are you finding that are really when you're talking with people and helping them coach to their career and helping them find the next set of skills they want to level up on? What are you seeing kind of like separates great practitioners versus good practitioners? Like, what's some of those defining attributes that you see um, individuals in our community?
Yeah, again, a lot of right answers out there, a lot of different opinions. My own is I like to see self learners. I like polymaths. I like
Mm,
people who are self driven. These are the people that can solve problems on their own creatively. And it's if you don't know how to do it, you'll just go learn it first and then you'll know. They don't impose like these self-imposed mental limitations. It's kind of like when if you're on a diet or if you want to get in shape, right? The idea is like, oh man, I could never do that. I could never squat whatever pounds, or I can never
yeah.
run a marathon. As soon as those limitations are there, then you set your physical limitations as well, because your mind's always going to restrict what your body can do to an extent. And the quality of these types of people, the quality of their questions are more indicative of um, their, their skill or their let's call it the depth and is the material good there. A lot of people who are starting off, they'll ask how questions. Like, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I and those are very task-based, tactical questions. The great questions are the ones why, right? Specifically, why do you, right?
Mm,
Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do we do this? They're more inquisitive in understanding, unpacking like the structure of how systems are set up, or the way we do these things. And those questions seem to indicate a more deeper level of curiosity and insight. Is less so how do I cook, right? Versus like, why do you use these kind of spices in cooking? All right. Why do we use salt in cooking, right? Or
mhm.
what does salt do, right? So they're more questioning the underlying, I guess, first principles almost. So the deeper thinking and curiosity portion. I think, one of the, if Benjamin Franklin was a cybersecurity practitioner, he'd be amazing, right? Mr. $100 Bill was a writer, he was a printer, philosopher, politician, postmaster, scientist. He invented like bifocals, the lightning rod. He was a newspaper editor. He wrote almanacs, civil activist, and like an ambassador to France. All right, straight up diplomat. He founded UPenn. He founded like the first fire department in Pennsylvania. And so when you
It
look
makes
at
all of our
someone,
LinkedIn profiles look so lame.
right? But the thing is, he didn't do it to build a great LinkedIn profile. He
Yeah.
just did it because he that's what he wanted to do and that's what he liked. So I'm a firm believer in nurture, and if you set the right environment and enough time, and you can get very good results. But at the same time, there's the X factor in people, right? You've either got it or you don't. It's kind of like code smells, right? If it really takes an experienced developer to, sense it. It's like, is this code good, or how skilled is the
Yeah.
developer? But when it comes to identifying security professionals, it's similar, right? There's that X factor, and you might need a couple of like really experienced masters to identify if someone has the chops or has the potential, after just a few interactions.
I think one of the gating experiences will be: are you comfortable working till 2 a.m.? If you can cross that threshold, then cybersecurity is welcome for you. Because more often than not, you somehow we end up doing that. Um, that's a really good insight, though. That like nurture plus time plus the X factor. That the idea that like we shouldn't just dismiss ourselves, or if we got siblings or friends who want to get in the community, oh, you don't have the pedigree, it's not going to work for you. Oh, you're not a master coder, cybersecurity is not for you. But this idea that we can expose ourselves into those who have gone before us and those who are great at what they do, we kind of move ourselves into just that area, whether it's the consumption of YouTube or podcasts or reading books, hands-on keyboard, giving ourselves the grace to have time to get better at our skills, and then keep like that experimentation. I wonder if like experimentation helps us discover what our individual X factor is. Just
No.
trying lots of things and seeing what works.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Nassim Taleb and
Mm.
his quartet, the Inserto. I don't know if it's a quartet. So it's like Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, and Skin in the Game. His books are really on risk and decision theory. And Anti-Fragile, he has some very, he's the kind of guy that will call academics like idiots to their face.
Uh-huh.
And he's very, polarizing character. But a lot of what he says, they make sense to an extent. For instance, he'll make the assertion that science doesn't make technology. Technology makes science. And when you think about it, wait, what do you mean by that? And then he'll point you to something like the aircraft. So if you go on YouTube, you can actually see videos of the people trying to fly.
Right.
And I recommend everybody do that because it's so entertaining, but at the same time, you recognize how much trial and error, how much experimentation. He uses the word tinkering is involved until it wasn't these guys these theoreticians who developed aerodynamics first. It was these bicycle mechanics that figured out how to fly first.
Yes.
And then the physicists, came along and said,
to explain how it works. Right.
Yeah, so that's how it works. So he calls that whole chapter "Teaching Birds How to Fly," because it's like, these guys is, oh yeah, the birds, they're flying, and they're like, oh, this is how they fly, and then they go lecture the birds on how to do it. So it's interesting that when you look at that, we can't arrive. There's a lot of things that we do that we just don't know why, but they're based off of big filtering. So like traditions, for example, these guys in the Amazon, they had I forgot what it was. Was it yucca or some type of root that they relied on as their staple source of food? Yeah. It had a lot of cyanide in it. And so it would take many, many days and half of these villagers' times to process it through boiling and fermenting and processing. And they were fine. When later colonialists took that plant and migrated to Africa for people to eat, a lot of the steps that they took involved in the production of this stuff, they skipped. And they did it in Africa because it grows very well in poor nutrient poor soils. And so to this day, as I understand, there's still cyanide poisoning from people who eat this stuff because they don't do like a lot of the traditions. And so there's skin in the game. The person who says, oh, you don't need to do that, it's fine, you just got to boil it long enough, you don't have to let it sit for 3 days before you can eat it. The people who did that in the Amazon, they died, right? So they were they experienced the results of their advice. So you have symmetry in there. So over time, I guess there's a big filter, and so what's left is these traditions and these arcane practices. I think Nassim, he was saying how the architects, right? They didn't have math or Euclidean geometry, and people were doing architecture like the Egyptians and stuff, and they were precise and accurate, and they stand for thousands of years. And if you actually use Euclidean geometry to try to do architecture, you would fail. And like the Romans, they would actually make their architects sleep under, and their families sleep under the bridges they built for like a period of time before anybody was allowed to cross that bridge. And in like the Hammurabi's code, you had to, if you built somebody a house and it collapsed on them and killed, you were killed as well, to bring symmetry into that economic equation. So going way back to what you were talking about with, the tinkering and experimentation, I think there's a lot of that here. You've got to be willing to do that, and taking responsibility and ownership for mistakes and stuff. I think that's one problem. If you set up a DNS server incorrectly, or set up a a server incorrectly, and now it's used as a launch point to attack other people, usually the sysadmins don't have to be.
I was going to say it's an interesting thing to parallel here. It's like you should support your own code in production, right? If every developer who releases a service, you're like, okay, and you're on the hook for every phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning from pager duty, like, I think that would help change culture a little bit. Same thing, like, and I think it's maybe one of the reasons that security professionals do well who come from an operations background, who come from being a hands-on developer previously, because you know what it's like to do the whole life cycle. But I don't think I'd ask anyone to sleep under a falling bridge. But I think that's a really interesting insight, though, about having a full feedback loop into if you build it and you're supporting it and you're also going to protect it so it's not going to get hacked. So you're going to think through the whole life cycle of that. Sorry. No, I think that's just an incredible insight to that. And also, you reminded me, I need to go read these books. Like, talk about a wealth of knowledge in those 4 books. I'm just only read a little bit of some of them. I'm like, okay, that's back on the list now. It's back on the list. So tell me a little bit more about, you've mentioned like this, going back to experimentation and having space to experiment and kind of labs and things to work on. Do you think that's currently a gap in our overall cybersecurity training curriculum? Or do you see any gaps, generally speaking, that if a practitioner was to walk down the kind of the paved path in front of them, they might be missing out on certain things? Or are there ways to make practitioners more robust so they can move into that point of excellence?
Yeah, I think cybersecurity training, it's very similar to like maybe a guild system or a dojo system, at least this time, this point in time. You have everything for your small businesses, and then to either like larger ones like SANS, that's more of like this mothership of education. And so, yeah, I like to see more master apprenticeships or a way for promising talent to get connected with like a master seeking to teach. Like these guild systems and dojo systems, it's a bunch of merchants or master craftspeople that come together and say like, hey, this is our profession. How do we perpetuate it and promote it, train the next generation, etc. Versus how cybersecurity came about. It came about like kind of independent people like that. I always think of like this lone sysadmin who's shivering in a server room wearing like a giant coat and like he's got frost all over his face, and he's the only person like keeping this company up back in the 90s. Or he's the only person who knows how any of this technology works. And so our profession really came out of that type of the lone wolves, and now we've become mainstream now. You throw around cyber and there's money following it.
Cyber blockchain AI will get you a lot of funding.
yeah, cyber blockchain AI will certainly. And so if there's a way we can foster that, even that's great. Maybe if we spin off a cyberspatial pro group down the road, great. But juniors are typically seen as a time suck in your organizations. They're perceived to carry a lot of risk because there's people who just don't work out, or they don't become amount to you put a lot of effort into training somebody and they're just average. And the more experienced you are, though, so the people who do become experienced, there's less risk to bring you in terms of a team and time and effort spent training, and you're now value added. But at the same time, the juniors who are promising are really high in demand. So if there's a way to balance that equation, for you to filter out for people who do have a lot of potential, and then match them up with more masters who are in need of assistance, or they want to teach and mentor people who are promising, that would be interesting. Although I don't know how you would do it if you're making like a platform or a marketplace, because then you'd have a double-sided marketplace style, and that business model is really hard to do. You have a chicken and egg problem. And the truth is, like, not everybody really has the aptitude to be like a cybersecurity professional. Just because it pays well and it's hot doesn't mean it's for everyone. I think psychographics more, and less demographics, right? And just like not everybody should be a doctor or a lawyer. And there's really a lack of institutionalized resources and training opportunities for people. A lot of this stuff's like scattered everywhere, decentralized in blog posts, news articles, tweets, and so the best doctors out there, they're always going to be the ones who live and breathe in the the medical field. But because you have these systems and these institutions like medical school, nursing school, technical trade schools, people who aren't necessarily the cream of the crop, but they have that psychographic aptitude for this, they're still viable and functional, and they're really important to have on the team. Yeah, not everybody can be chief, right?
Right.
So I think startup style environments are really great opportunities for people who are junior learning cyber, or in general even, because cyber defense exercises is maybe even a proxy example for like a startup. Anything where you have to get hands on with a breadth of technology stacks, from building, configuring, maintaining, securing, and then operating that under stress. You grow very fast, and then it quickly filters out people who they're not the right they're not right fit for that kind of
Right.
work.
And they would be better suited in a different role, and they can
Yeah.
take all these skills they've just learned and be that 10 times better at their next role. But it doesn't have to be that you
Yeah,
make a
like maybe
decision when
they're
you're
a
18.
better project manager, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or you want to like dive into, you really enjoyed the Ruby coding that you were doing for that Metasploit thing that you're working on, and you realize, okay, actually what I want to do is not be exploiting things. I want to be writing Ruby on Rails applications, right? So you're going to go down that road and use those skills that you've learned just to really make this entire thing about Ruby. But what else? I like that idea of really having that apprenticeship and guild. I think that's a pretty powerful insight. And I just think, as well as security leaders, one of the things we could do is just start to institutionalize that into our teams and our hiring process, right? So even if it's not formal in a marketplace sense, like you're discussing, but I'm just thinking through all the more senior leaders who are watching this show and the investors in the space, kind of like developing that security culture where you feel that you can take a risk on someone coming out of high school or in their second year of college, and giving them opportunity to learn and have exposure without betting the farm, right? So you're going to say, okay, great, all we can do is hire interns and hopefully one of them pans out to be the next security engineer. But crafting a way where just mentorship is our part of our culture, part of how we as practitioners kind of raise up the next round of engineers. So, I mean, maybe that gets into the next thing, which is I wanted to ask you about, was like culture of continuous training, continuous improvement. You've talked about as a few things so far, but when it comes to that culture and building that and taking a thoughtful perspective on that, what are your thoughts? What are some of the ways that like we suck at it, where we're not doing so well as leaders in security, and where might we be better, and kind of start to make that a more robust part of the security teams?
Yeah, culture is active. Have to do. It has to be very deliberate. You have these companies like Netflix is known for its culture. And the I think Patty I forgot her name. McCord. I think Pat McCord was her name. She freedom or responsibility was the whole Netflix culture thing. They came up with this like something slide culture deck, and they straight up said, hey, this is what we expect, and you have to define your culture first. And so if the culture is our customers first, we're not going to be the ones trying to shut everybody down because somebody got infected. We're here to support them, right? We're not the demigods in the server closet that think we're better than everybody. So on one hand, you can, if you don't come out and openly, this is our culture, you're going to naturally regress back to whatever culture that people carry with them. And if the best person on your team is that guy who likes to write Perl for everything, then he wants to kind of technocratically shut everything down. No offense to people who like Perl, right? Then that's what you're gonna get, and then Hollywood's gonna see that. People are going to watch Hollywood, and then it's that reinforcing of how people see a security team. So the people that you do promote and elevate are also really important, because it signals to, well, this is what we value, right? So if you value people who are purely technical wizards, and they get promoted the highest, but they don't necessarily have the greatest people skills, they are can be a bit elitist, then you're going to create an issue there. If you find the people who are very good, very skilled, are also great people, and you elevate the Benjamin Franklins, right? Then you can really do a lot to change the culture, because they are the ones that now can set the culture. So I think for companies and teams, it really has to be a very deliberate act. And these kind of conversations can become uh, very difficult to have. Just out in the open. Great book called Radical Candor, right? Where you deeply care, but you also challenge directly. I think that's something people can walk away with. I think people, can do videos are a great way to, they're asynchronous, right? So things can get at 10 if I'm talking about how you're really arrogant and elitist, and this is why. If there was a video out there and you happen to see it, because it came from Cyberspatial, hint hint, then it's a more softer way. It's not spoken at you; it's just about this class, and so there's different ways to try to change things, so synchronously and also asynchronously.
Well, I'm really happy to say at this current moment in time, there is no video on Cyberspatial saying that Conor is arrogant and elitist. So, but I really do like that idea. It's just like we can take different mediums and use them to deliver different messages in the right way. Like, to your point, like sometimes some messages should be asynchronous video, some messages to be written, some messages to be private one-on-one conversations, some messages are appropriate for a Slack room, and using different media platforms for in fostering different types of engagement and sending certain different messages. And then of course, if we find yourself in a leadership position, whether that's officially with a title or not, to your point earlier, it's like use that as a platform then for fostering and promoting the culture, yet actively promoting the culture that we want, not just kind of what passively emerges. Now, you've had this really interesting idea, and I really like it. We talk about different platforms and stuff we've talked about off camera, which is like the power of Minecraft and like the engagement there, and it's a different platform. Like, so I feel like let's tee that one up and tease that out a little bit. We've talked about this idea of like we can use video for an asynchronous engagement, but what can we go beyond that as a security community and have different messages in different places? So can you explore that and unpack that concept and idea that we were discussing?
Yeah, it's still in its infancy, right? So word salad, right? Thought mouth here. Um, when you look at the evolution and development of marketing, I think I've been told, right, by marketing is communication, right? Good communication. So if I'm blind and you write stuff for me, right, I'm not going to be able to understand, right? If I'm there's those physical impairments, but there's also kind of psychological impairments. Like the baby who grew up with an iPad is going to like communicate very differently than the person who grew up with in a crib full of other babies, and there was no technology, there was virtual kind of interaction. So we've gone from in-person interaction to email to phone calls to video, and now we're starting to see a lot of growth in the people who are live streamers, right? Your Twitch and people, games, right? Like live streaming, whether it's Fortnite or whatever, it gets a lot of attention. It gets a lot of people engaged because it's a two-way street now. No, it's no longer me watching you. It's now you're doing something, and now I can comment on it. I can say, hey, you should try turn your hat backwards. It's like, oh yeah, I should turn my hat backwards. So now you have extra level. It's harder for me just to walk away once I've asked you to do something, because now we're almost, it's like we've come to the table, we've opened up the Monopoly board, right, and we're starting to play Monopoly. It's harder for me to just walk away and walk out of the room than if you were just a passerby on the street and say, "Hey, how are you?" And you say, "Hey, man, I got a great thing for you. It's this thing called Monopoly. Do you want to check it out?" And you say, "Yeah, I'm good." So, drawing people to more interactivity, more engagement is the name of the game. Going back to Minecraft and these virtual worlds, these simulation games, especially multiplayer ones, a lot of friendships get formed in them over time, and you're able to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do in the real world. You're able to essentially simulate and model out, let's say, a small tribe, a political structure in the game, where you
Yeah.
define rules, and I'm the king and you have to pay me tribute. Good luck doing that with the homeowners association in real life.
Yeah.
So it gives people an outlet, and it gives people a way to interact and engage with people on a different level. So I think there's something to be said about, where's marketing going, where is human attention going, and in terms of cybersecurity training, how do you reach people? Because a lot of these practitioners, when they go home, there's the people who stay up to 2 a.m. and commit to GitHub. That's great, but really the vast majority of people, I would say, I know people who say, I get home, I just turn on the Xbox. I don't want to think about anything, cyber related. So, people like, I think it was 2018 or what year, Fortnite had an in-game concert for 10 million people with a DJ Marshmallow.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, you can watch it on YouTube, actually, the replay. I mean, it's a in virtual concert, and it's like 10 million people there. Good luck getting 10 million people in a stadium. So there's if that's where the trend's going, and especially with the younger generation as they get older, that's the next generation of people who are going to be in our shoes. So what are we doing to take these same concepts and apply them? Physical security, social engineering, and in terms of the game world, there's the setting up I remember playing Minecraft like when it was like an alpha, and you set it up and you figure out how to get multiplayer going, and there's all these mods and different things you can do, and then there's like in-game activities. So there's a lot of useful. It's a useful tool, I think, for teaching and communicating with people.
And I think that's such a cool idea. I understand it's like we're still fleshing an idea, but it's like this concept of we have an opportunity if we're willing to engage there, right? We know 10 million people are willing to show up for a Marshmallow concert, DJ concert. So, okay, what about training the next generation of security practitioners? Is that going to be the new dojo inside of a virtual world? Is this going to be the future of cybersecurity awareness training, where everyone's jumping on and they're either in a virtual world or you've got your VR goggles on and you're exploring this new simulated threat in front of you? How are you going to respond? Like, I could imagine the fun things you'd have with a phishing attack in real life, somehow materializing that. So I think there's something really powerful there. And for those who are listening, who are in the investor space and security leaders, I think it's important for us to be aware that if the time and attention is going here, it also means there's an opportunity for training and education and betterment. But I imagine also on the other side, if that's what time and attention and units of value are, that's where the adversaries are now showing up as well. So, yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting insight you've got there. So, Ricky, I do have a few more questions for you, but I know we're kind of running towards the end of our time here. So, to really pull this back together, if we were to, all the next generation of Benjamin Franklins who are watching this show today, who are thinking, okay, cool, where do I get started? Like, I'm excited, I'm ready to be a polymath, I'm ready to just kind of explore, right? Position myself and inundate, bathe in great content, give myself time and start working on those different experiments. Where should they get started? Where should they go to learn more?
Yeah, I think people there's a lot to be said about the local library, right? The first thing people ask is, what certification do I need to get? What cert, should I prepare for? The answer is go get a library card, right? There's tons of books and stuff that you can get for practically free, and you're going to be able to build a much better baseline, just knowledge of awareness. That's step one, building that baseline so you can have a meaningful conversation. It's like before you can talk to somebody in German, you have to learn some German words first. You have to learn some basic grammar rules and stuff. And then, like build your home lab, right? That home lab can be just a desktop tower that you've had sitting in the closet collecting dust. You say, I'm going to get this thing working, right? I'm going to put some kind of maybe if it's Windows 95, you still have a copy of Windows 95, and just start tinkering around, right? Follow people's projects that they're doing online, or better yet, document your own projects and put it out there, because that will get you known for like, oh, this is the weirdo that set up a Windows 95 box to do XYZ, and using good communication, right? You were able to showcase something you learned and communicate it while you were doing it. And now that puts you on the radar, right? People who think, oh, well, he can set that up. I'm sure he could also figure out how to set up an AWS cluster to do load scaling. If you have that baseline, you have that you've demonstrated curiosity and to an extent aptitude to get outcomes and results. So now the doors and opportunities start to open. Then you want to figure out, okay, what doors do I need to close myself to focus and direct my attention and energy? For me, right at this point in time, I am probably the least technical person I'd imagine of everybody I know in this space. I feel like I'm just forgetting everything that I've ever learned. But at the same, I'm picking up a lot about YouTubing and media and these other things. It's like I'm spending time getting really good with FFmpeg and much less good at SSH. So there's there's trade-offs that you have to decide on. So I think that would be my advice for someone who's just like really interested in picking up something new, particularly cybersecurity.